two questions that are kind of under the same category about CUI marking and why or why not. And you have a very interesting perspective on this. So the questions were, under what circumstances is an OSC independently authorized to identify CUI and mark it as such? But then the follow-on question was, why should an OSC independently identify CUI when DFARS assigns the accountability for doing so to the DoD? So one is, when do you do that? And the other one is, why would you even bother if this is DoD's job?
Okay, yeah. So let's maybe split this up a little bit, as sort of a two-part answer, right? So the first question was
a bifurcated answer.
Yes, exactly. So what would be the circumstances where an OSC is going to say this is CUI and mark it as such? So in those types of situations, I would say that there's like a really easy answer that you can give, and you can sort of backload this with a more complicated answer. So on the front end, now that we have more unified guidance on CUI in the revised DoD instruction 523024, we're told that, hey, just to clarify, all DoD distribution marked documents B through F are CUI. Are we clear? Okay, great. And so with that in mind, when you hear about preliminary markings described in the document, right? If you've got a contract deliverable that hasn't been through a DoD review yet, because it's still with you, the contractor, they'll tell you just put, DIST space B or space D or whatever on that document and just ship it. So we already know that there's a mechanism by which a contractor would say, this is going to be CUI, slap a preliminary marking without a lot of the extra supporting detail on it, and send it on its way. So there's at least one component there, right? But the second part of that question, I don't know if it was the same from the same source or not, was talking about how DFARS clearly assigns, responsibility or accountability or whatever to the DoD to decide what is CUI. I would take issue with that assumption. And
yeah.
Here's why. Hear me out, okay? DFARS provisions and solicitations, when they come out, say, hey, just so you know, the DoD is going to lay claim to unlimited rights to whatever you send them unless you say otherwise. And then you have to negotiate yourself into a position where you're going to apply limitations on, tell me if this sounds familiar based on the definition of CUI, limits on dissemination or safeguarding requirements for your intellectual property, right?
Sounds very similar.
Very, very similar. So if you don't want your intellectual property to be published on the internet or to be given to your competitor for a rebid or to end up as a national stock number on FedMall, you have to do something about it. Right. So you have to negotiate data rights on the things you're going to send over. You negotiate on that pre-award, right?
Right.
And you have to put special markings on those documents, either government purpose rights saying, hey, you can't go commercialize this government for a certain period of time, or limited rights like, hey, just full stop. You call me before this goes anywhere.
Right. And the CUI markings enable that sort of that system, right?
Well, that's the realization people have to make. DODI 523024 says, hey, DoD personnel, you get a document marked that way as a contract deliverable, it qualifies as CUI because of that marking. And it gets a defense category of proprietary business information. So in my experience, where it's the DIB generating most of the intellectual property in government contracting, not the government, I would say that the DIB has the most accountability for making something CUI.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that and what we're talking about here is a separate part of the DFARS catalog, right? We're talking about rights and technical data, which is a separate clause or separate series of clauses. If your first exposure to DFARS was just 7012, just the new CMMC rule in 2020, then you're sort of missing all of this extra context around what's going on. And even if you look at 7012 very closely, it's only like 13 paragraphs long. And I think half of them have to do with the obligations of the DoD for handling your data as a contractor when they have to protect it and report when there's an issue or a compromise or anything. It's not all about just what you do with their data. It's a two-way street. So yeah, I think that's a very valuable perspective. And your CS2 talk went into great detail on this topic. And so, as we start to get some clips and content out from CS2 over time, we'll definitely make sure that we link back to that. But everyone should definitely reach out to you and check out that content, because that's a very interesting and valuable twist that changes the perspective on CUI. I think it's awesome.